Hi and welcome back to our first episode podcast for JXJ Studios. I'm one of our main team members, Samuel.
I'm Rowan.
Hi, I'm Maria.
And today we're going to be looking at the Netflix release of 2018's Girls with Balls. It should be an interesting film, just judging by the title. And spoilers ahead if anyone is not acquainted with this incredible film. Alright, so I was going to say, I think it's one of those many masterpieces. I would
argue otherwise.
It's an interesting one. So let's talk about it. I mean, story-wise, what did we who would like to sort of start this one?
I don't think there was a story. I mean, I don't know, because it seemed like one of those things where there was a little bit of a plot, but then it just starts. It's like more of a day in a life of rednecks, and then there's just a volleyball team in the woods.
In the life of rednecks, this sounds pretty spicy.
That'd be more interesting than Girls with Balls. Very derogatory to women.
It really was interesting, wasn't it?
I've got to say, I started watching it and I got to about halfway through and I was like, this film, I can't deal with it. You know, a lot of the shot types, and it was so sexualized for the women, and I just thought, what is going on? And then I got about halfway through and I realized, you know, this is a parody of women depicted in a film in quite a sexist way sometimes. And I did end up quite enjoying it in a kind of way. But yeah, it was what was expected, but it was a pretty crazy film.
It was. I think that the weird thing on sort of my watching of it was I enjoyed it. I ended up enjoying it because I almost started voting for who was going to die and who I really disliked in the moment, and was looking forward to seeing them disappear. Because I'll be honest, this is the kind of film that the characters, especially the team of girls, is so exaggerated with their sort of stereotypes and the way they are personality-wise.
Yeah.
You end up going for these quiet-mouthed redneck guys that they bump into in the woods. And I guess, guys, we should probably give the listeners a overview, I guess, of what the basic story is here for anyone who hasn't watched it.
Is there a basic story to this? I need to get up.
Look, there definitely
the
is.
synopsis on Google.
Yeah, the synopsis on Netflix or Google. But I think it was all about, what is a team? You know, do we work together, or do our survival instincts take over and it's each man for themselves, or each woman for themselves, or in this case, each girl with balls for themselves? And I think even the title itself was just interesting, and the way they ended up using volleyballs as their weapons of choice against guns, and the fact that it actually worked for them at times blew my mind. Yeah.
It blew mine as much as it blew theirs. But I actually found that bit really cringy and comedic. Because those guys, the rednecks, had guns the whole time. If I was one of them, I would have just shot all three of them, just point blank. They're like 2 meters ahead, and of course they're going to obviously get hit and stuff.
Yeah.
But they were just really pathetic.
I've got to say, some of the special effects there really cracked me up, because each time one of the rednecks got hit in the face by the volleyball, they would just spit out this kind of bright red liquid into the air. And it was clear that they did holding it in their mouth. It was really funny.
Or the chicken they hit at the start, and it's like they ran over a balloon of jelly, and it's like, how much blood does this chicken have?
There was... It was weird, wasn't it? I mean, when I watched it, I was so shocked about how calm they were about it. Like, they just keep driving, like they've, used the wind wipers, and the blood is smeared all over the place, and they almost don't care. They're still driving as a team. And I think that, look, the story was odd. It didn't have a flow to it, in my opinion, and I guess the worst thing that I've mentioned to you guys before is the fact that there was no planning from any of the characters. Like, the girls never once got together and said, "Hey, look, we're gonna do this, and this is the plan," kind of thing. They just sort of almost went with whatever was going on. And the same way with these redneck guys. I mean, my confusion was, besides the human dog man, my confusion was where on earth the rednecks were going with the whole chaining the girls up. Because at the end bit, they have 3 of the girls tied up, and I believe it's Tatiana, Morgan, and there was one other remaining. And he, like, delivers the severed head of her girlfriend to her. He puts it on, like, the record player. Look, like, I know record players are out of fashion, but, like, I thought it was a little bit injustice to the record player to do that to it. And I was very confused why they didn't just kill them, because I thought their purpose was like a Hunger Games kind of esque style where, they're out in the woods and they're being hunted. Instead of, unlike Hunger Games where they're hunting each other for, survival and for recognition and for, yeah, exactly. Also, can we talk about briefly their shooting technique? I don't know what you guys thought, but when they first ran down the mountain, they shot the speakers more times than they shot anything else. There's like 3 shots of the speaker getting absolutely slapped with a bullet and this spark effect. And I'm like, are you guys deliberately shooting your own speakers, or is that just like stormtrooper level aiming here? Like, where are we going with that?
I'm convinced that was a tactical point. I saw them running down, and they're shooting the speakers, thinking it like would ricochet off it. The girls were running sporadically, and I actually am convinced that they were semi-intelligent enough to go, if I hit that, it'll ricochet off there and potentially hit this girl. But that's the only... I could give them as much credit as I can, but no, that was bad. But I want to know what their end game was, because you said they had them tied up at the end, and that he gave her, or showed I forgot who it was, the girl's girlfriend's severed head, the one who was tied to the chair, Danny, yeah, and then she was like getting really happy and sympathetic, like, she's like, oh, these guys aren't bad people at all. It's like they shot off your girlfriend's head, and then they cut her head off, stuffed it, and now they're handing it to you like it's a peace offering. Like, I think that means war. From most people.
She's like, don't touch my women, but then they give her the stuffed head as a peace offering, and she's like, thank you so much, my beautiful girl. She's back, and it just didn't make any sense. I think what we got to acknowledge is that this film was a parody, and I think, it was an addition to the trash horror genre, definitely. And I think it was really great if you look at it from that perspective, because it was a bit crazy. It was a little bit like Scary Movie. What do you guys think about that?
I think it was...
the real villain is Sergio.
Yeah.
Yes.
He did the whole team.
Mm.
And after he walked off with that one girl at the start, I was like, they're definitely going to be doing in the change room.
I think that's the interesting part, is that this whole time these girls are fighting for their lives, but they're far more interested in Sergio, right? And even that one time where one of the girls gets access to her phone, she goes into the bathroom and she screams at Sergio through the phone, and her battery dies when she could have called the police. And I think it's just so irrational, because in the real world, a girl just wouldn't do that. But
you'd call the police.
You'd call the police 100%, but it is kind of funny. Like Sam was saying earlier, all these characters are very much stereotypes, very much farcical. They're not realistic depictions of women, and I think that's important to acknowledge. They weren't trying to create realistic stories about women. They were trying to create something that was kind of quick laughs. What do you think?
I mean, look, I would certainly call Sergio in a time of crisis. I would certainly call the man, because he's clearly very capable. to help you in any circumstance. But I think I agree with Maria. The girls in this film are extreme stereotypes to a point that was just so annoying, really. And their motives were all over the place. Like Morgan's betrayal, then not wanting to betray, and then betraying at the end. I don't know if it was out of desperation. Didn't make a lot of sense to me, or didn't really flow very well, because, like, again, the story was sort of so dry, really, from a real good plot, that you kind of just didn't work. And I felt like the film had too many personalities. I mean, the coach is himself could probably handle a movie, let's be honest. His personality was very extreme. Yeah, he was very extreme. And I think that it was just an odd choice, in particular with the coach. Let's talk about that. The coach's Chihuahua, if you want to. Is that what the dog was? I think that's what the dog was. The coach's Chihuahua. That was that is probably what I would define as the movie's moment where I sat back and I went, okay, there's nothing here. We're just all over the place, let's be honest. And let's be honest, the effects of the dog, I think the budget had run out by that point. Because the dog was, well, I've seen... That's it.
Stretchy toy or something.
I've seen real toys.
Flexible. That thing is more flexible than most athletes. I'm telling you that right now. That dog, he almost turned that thing into what's the thing called? A dachshund or a sausage dog. If it lived, that's what it would. That's its new life. But I found it. But I
it defied the laws of physics.
Yeah, let's just say that. I feel like there's like a massive chunk missing with the coach, because last time you see him, he's got a dog on his crotch and he's smacking it against the wall with his crotch. Looks like he's doing stuff to the dog, which is actually kind of funny. It was probably the only funny part of the movie. But then he comes in clutch at the end with war paint on and everything, and you feel like you've just missed an entire character development. I know this is like a piss take, but he just comes in and now he's all of a sudden just a savage.
Yeah, like he was coming up with this whole story, like, oh, I told the girls to run, but they didn't. Sometimes they don't listen to their coach. He was totally looking for an escape. He was looking for a car on that road. Instead, he found a Chihuahua. He didn't get an escape. Eventually, though, he found that car, and the audience were completely excluded from that. If he'd have found that car, his character totally would have been on the road getting away. He would not have gone to save those girls. But he did go in to save those girls and got totally trapped in the wall. That was pretty funny.
I think the segment we missed was just his audition for Saving Private Ryan. Was that segment there that we missed, and that's why he's coming with the war paint, because I mean it did look like you could just put the man into Saving Private Ryan and it would have worked perfectly.
In between shoots.
That's what I'm saying. He was just sort of the actor was in between shoots and he's bouncing back and forth with his war paint on, and I think it was just a mismatch of schedules acting wise. But I mean look, it's one of those films where, I mean, I myself, and I know Rowan and Maria are big horror fans, and we enjoy a good horror flick, and I have to admit, the many times I've seen Girls with Balls appear in the horror genre of Netflix and just completely and utterly gone, ugh, and then just completely ignored it, and not bothered to ever think about its existence, and then to sort of put ourselves in a position where we watch it, and we did end up kind of enjoying it in a weird element, where I sat back and just realised that this is such a weird ride. It's such a goofy kind of ride of a horror flick that really I didn't feel there was any actual horror, unless you want to include the sort of gory blood overtone that it had with its moments.
I wouldn't consider gore. For a movie like that, the gore and the violence probably wouldn't. I personally wouldn't have ever given it a horror rating.
No.
I would have just given it just a comedy rating that's just really violent.
Exactly. Yeah, I think
Because you
it's
can have gore in a horror movie, and it can be terrifying. But the way they used the blood and just all the violence in general, it was more comedic than scary.
Yeah, especially when the girl, I believe it was Danny, the one who knew how to survive. Half her hand gets blown off, and she runs through the woods. And if half your hand gets blown off, I'd imagine you'd be in agonising pain. But she's either got high pain tolerance or she's able to reel it in really well, because she suddenly just flicks from "ow, my hand" to "hey guys, this is what we're going to do," and she almost has this massive change, because she's almost not in pain at all, which I found kind of comedic. But then when she eventually gets taken several seconds later, I did have a fantastic chuckle to myself, I have to admit, because it was just with the film. I thought that's perfect. That really sums up that this film will just really kind of sort of avert your expectations of how it might flow and just throw something at you that's a real curveball.
I think Danny, she was in total shock. She was running through the woods. Her nervous system was like, okay, we've been attacked, but we're not going to feel anything because we've got to survive. And then she said, girls, let's get in our little huddle. Let's discuss the first rule of forest survival. And then her brains got blown out. That was a metaphor for the brains of the entire team getting destroyed. From that moment, it was every girl for themselves. And I think that's what was so interesting about this film, is that it was every girl for themselves. Morgan even said something about that classic quote, there's no I in team. She was like, I am the I, it's all about me sort of thing. And
yeah,
I thought that was so interesting. Let's talk about Morgan's character.
That character, for me personally, was the one I wanted to see get killed the most. I'll be honest. And thankfully she does. She was a traitor, and she was from the start really just a horrible person. I mean, she treats the teammates, even in that opening scene, the final volleyball tournament, she uses one of her players as a lily pad to step up and over to get the ball. She really was just an awful character to begin with. And then her overtoned use of language as well, I just thought was unneeded as well, and unnecessary. She drops a couple of very interesting words that I just thought it's not needed, especially in a film of this sort of design. It's just not needed, and it was a bit out of the blue, really. But I guess this whole film's existence is out of the blue, so it kind of works.
100%. I think Emma was kind of the direct, the direct contradiction of Morgan, right? Emma was like, let's be a team, and especially after the team captain's death, Hazuki, Emma was like, she was the best team captain we ever had, and she decides at that point to kind of step into Hazuki's shoes and to really hold the team together. And I think we can all agree that Emma seems the least likely to survive, and suddenly she becomes a killing machine. I love her character arc, and I think she really has a villain's kind of origin story. Emma, was bullied, and she should have become the one in the end that kind of turned on our whole team. But she instead decided to go, what? I love my team, and I'm going to protect my team. And I think, she stood up for everyone. She saved them all. What a badass.
It was. I mean, look, let's quickly touch upon Hazuki and her incredibly emotional death. I mean, the headless body in the background, still walking around.
That was pretty good.
It was so unrealistic, and then you see him walking up the trail a few minutes later, and you're like,
I love that.
Still walking?
We love a self-aware parody, and I think that's what this film was. It was so self-aware. Yeah. And if we look at the trope of the guy playing the guitar and telling the story, that disjointed narration, I think, at 3 points during the film, the start, the middle, and the end, can we say?
Yeah.
It was such a self-aware parody of horror, wasn't it?
It really was. It knew what it was doing from the start. I kind of view it as kind of a failed scary movie, which I'm a big fan of the very first scary movie. And I just found I think it was a really self-aware parody, as you said, Maureen. I think it kind of just knew what it was doing. I wanted to turn our attention to the ratings briefly, just to see how it all looked from other people's perspective. With a Rotten Tomatoes score of 42% and an IMDb of 3.9 out of 10, I think we can all agree this film is one to be forgotten in many ways. And now wrapping it up here time-wise, I'm going to turn it to our team as a whole. How many volleyballs would we throw up and ferociously smack into Olivier Afonso's face for directing this film? As much as we love him and we just want to say respect to his creative art style, how many would you give, Maria?
Look, I think I'm going to spike approximately 5.5 volleyballs into his face as punishment. But, like, I would also like to say props to Alfonso, because I do think that this film was very self-aware, and honestly, I loved it. I would watch it again. I did like it, in a sense. Yeah, I did.
Rowan, what about you?
I personally would spike 7 volleyballs. I understand the self-awareness of it all. It just didn't grasp me. It just felt, I don't know, very displaced. And I mean, you can see what they were trying to do. It's just I feel like there wasn't enough planning. There was enough planning with what they wanted to do and how they wanted each character to end up. Because I feel like the foundations were there. Everything was. It could have been done well if probably there was another hour, or let's say another half hour, and a little bit more into the budget, just so we could get some better CGI.
That's fair. I think it was definitely lacking in that department. I should probably mention before I give my final verdict and this podcast comes to a close that our rating system is spiking no balls at the director's face is a good thing, and a 10 is the worst it'll go. So we're effectively flipping the 0 to 10 rating the opposite way around. I think this film for me was painfully boring. I found myself on my phone a couple of times just because it was so predictable in many ways, in my opinion. There was no real horror aspect to it, so it was very much letting down viewers for that kind of element. If you were looking for that, it's definitely not something to go for this film. However, I do respect what Olivier was trying to do with his sort of creative decision of an extreme kind of stereotyped film with a heap of just sort of wacky compartments to it, which some horror movies can feel like they have, just these crazy kind of situations going on. I felt like the dialogue, though, was lacking, and again, following on what Rowan was saying, there just was no direction. The characters' arcs, the whole story, the plot, just felt like, honestly, it was just put together last minute, and it was like, let's just run with it. And so really, I found myself siding with the villains, which is often not what you really want in a horror film most of the time. So I'm probably, if I was going to rate this one, I'm going to spike very aggressively 8.5 volleyballs, that half being a weird looking volleyball, into Olivier's face. But that's it. But also thanking him for creating this, because we wouldn't have this podcast. We wouldn't have this first episode. So we have to thank him.
Yeah, and I will say it was a great little bit of escapism. And I do think that there's definitely a place for films like this. Films that you can go to and you can just escape into a land of chaos. And I think they definitely have their place.
Definitely. I would agree with that. Ron, would you agree?
Yeah, there was definitely chaos, not only in the production, but in the movie. This movie was chaos.
It's a good way to define it. It really was. Well, wrapping our first episode up today, guys, I think it was a good, interesting little film to begin with. Stay tuned for our next one, where I believe we might be looking at a recent film being released, and you guys will hear about that very soon.
Peace out.
Ciao.